I have a special guest on today's episode that you do not want to miss. We're talking about reclaiming the power of our cycles, challenging old narratives about womanhood, and creating new traditions that honor the full arc of the female experience. My guest is Apollonia Gallegos, the brilliant mind behind Mi Hita. Apollonia is a passionate advocate for women's rights in education. She holds a master's in education, is a trained doula, fertility awareness educator, and yoga instructor. With a powerful background in teaching, program designing, social justice, sex education, birth work, and the arts, she brings a deeply holistic and justice rooted approach to everything she creates. Through her own journey, Apollonia saw the massive gap in how our society understands or doesn't understand the female cycle. And she decided to do something about it. She created Mi Hita to close that gap, reconnect us to the wisdom of our bodies, and inspire new ways of honoring the strength of the XX chromosome. So get ready. This conversation is powerful as much as it is practical. Welcome back. I am so excited that you have joined me again in the Aligned Womb, Aligned You podcast. I'm Kate Nagai, and I am your host and womb guide on this journey. I'm here to help you to lean into the language of your menstrual cycle so that you can align yourself and awaken and activate to your womb wisdom to live the most inspired life. I am so excited to jump into this episode and to dive into today's topic. So let's get started. Welcome to the podcast, Apollonia. I am really thrilled to have this conversation because I've had people come on to talk more about priestesshood and goddess work, but not necessarily where I think we're going to go today on this idea of ancestral wisdom from kind of like this cyclical perspective,
hmm
which really kind of excites me because that's where my work actually began before I got into more of this contemporary knowledge, scientific, I don't know what you want to call it, clinicalness of the menstrual cycle. I first got really curious about it, and I don't know if you know her, but through Miranda Gray.
No, I don't.
Okay, so Miranda Gray's out of the UK. She does this beautiful training called it's Moon Mother training, but she does womb blessing attunements and womb healing work. And ages ago, like we're talking 10 years ago now, probably, I was working with fertility clients and doing it from a yoga therapy perspective. So bringing it in kind of like that ancient Ayurvedic kind of practice, but learning about the menstrual cycle at the same time. And I had reached out on this Facebook group for fertility clinicians, just asking like for resources. And I'm in Canada, and there was another person in Canada that reached out to me saying, "You don't know me, and you don't know if you know this person, but she's my teacher, and she's from the UK, and she's coming to your city in
Oh,
like
cool.
it was like 2 weeks." And I was like, "What?" Like I had never heard of this. I thought it was around fertility work, so I signed up immediately. I got one of the last spots because it was so last minute, and it turned out that it was all about kind of this ancestral wisdom, this stuff that we've never been taught, but that's been kind of like generational wisdom that's been passed down. And it
hmm
opened my mind to see the woman's body in a whole new way besides procreation. So, so
Yes.
I'm really interested. What got you into this work? What was the catalyst of being like, there's got to be more to what's happening in my body than this bleed cycle?
Yes. Well, a few things. When I was 9 years old, I saw my first birth. So I saw my cousin be born, and it was just this moment where I became pretty infatuated with the female body. I just couldn't believe women did that, right? And so that there was that a whole being came out of a person. I thought that was really cool. And then a couple months later, my little sister was born, and I say that that was my first ever photography gig because I, with the wound up camera, took all the photos during that birth, and I was just I got up there and I took all the photos. It was really cool, and we still have those in a cool book for her. But that to me, I ended up finding out that my great grandmother was a midwife. I became really obsessed with like birth and just thinking about birth, and I really wanted my period and like all of those things. Yeah, just were really interesting to me. And I remember like after I got my first cycle, my grandmother and my aunt were trying to explain to me like, okay, you can like take your temperature. There's also some methods where you can like spit and you can like check your saliva, and there's other methods where you can like check your underwear for like fluid. And like I just had no clue what they were like trying to like pass down to me or trying to give me information or insight on. And so I ended up going to college, and I like to say that I sort of got like my mind got colonized. Like I just was like, I need to make money. I need to follow this like path, the path to, you get a degree and then you get a job and you get a corporate job and you that's how you sustain life. And so I had always been interested in women's health, and I took here and there, did a little bunch of little classes within college that would allow me to like kind of flex into things. Like I took a human sexuality course, an anthropology course, sociology course, and there was a local midwife college that are like kind of nearby, and I was always really interested in some of that stuff. So I would go online and like look at their things, but I never did anything fully with that. And I got on birth control because all my friends were on birth control, and yeah, and that's how it sort of went. And then um flash forward into my late 20s, getting almost to my 30s, I was hiring for a role that so I led a recruitment team, and I was hiring for a role. And one of the girls I had offered the position to, she said, you know what, I think I'm going to follow my heart and I want to become a doula. And I was like, wait, what is a doula? And so she told me about becoming a doula. And I thought, oh my gosh, I should become a doula. Like, this is so interesting. Like, I've always been interested in this space, but I never knew that you could do anything besides becoming a midwife or becoming a doctor. And I never really thought about like going to med school. I just felt like that was out of reach for me. And so after she told me about that, I really started looking into becoming a doula. And then through my own like sort of trials and tribulations, my husband and I ended up trying to conceive when we were in our early 30s, and we had a lot of miscarriages. And I just started learning a lot about my body. And I ended up doing a doula training course and became a doula. And then through that, just got exposed to so many different people and ways of being and thought processes that sort of kind of gave me this thought around like this ancestral wisdom that we all carry within us is connected to our like broader how we operate. And so I learned a lot about like the fertility awareness method. I did a training through fem for that. I came across a lot of different practitioners, so I did a really cool partera fellowship under a midwife here in San Diego, Tema Mercado, who I absolutely adore. She ended up being my midwife for my son. But I learned just a lot of information that I think is important to connect women to. And little things like my grandmother would say, don't wear, like, always make sure you're wearing your socks in the house. And I just never understood like how having warm feet contributed to the womb. And so there's a lot of intersection with things that our families pass on, or ideas that people pass on that are not, they're not scientific per se, but like when you get down into it, you're like, oh, this actually does have relevance. So that's my long-winded way of telling you how I got here.
No, that's great. It's really interesting that you share like even about the cold feet, right? Of having socks on. These are not things that I think many of us in Western cultures are taught because it does seem kind of woohoo-ish, right?
Mhm,
But my husband, being of Asian descent, his parents, it was so interesting because we went through fertility troubles as well. And the things that his mom would tell me not to do, like going on my tiptoes, right? That I was not allowed to reach my arms above my head. Like there was all these things that, kind of seemed like, is there science behind this? But I was like, you know what? I'm going with it. Like you get to this point where you're so desperate to find some kind of something that makes you feel like you're taking part in your health, other than taking a pill or giving all of your power up to a physician,
mhm,
that I was like, I'm willing to try anything, right? And let's say we've gone to having three kids. I don't know if that was because I didn't put my hands above my head while I was trying to conceive or any of those things. But, I think there's a lot of wisdom and science behind it. And, where I got into the whole, let me back up here. I've got so many thoughts in my head. I never thought I was going to work with the human body in my work, right? I started off as a social worker, and then that was too much. That was emotionally and traumatically too much. So I then switched gears, went into the corporate world because I was like, now I just got to make money.
mhm,
And then I was like, I'm going through fertility. I want to learn about the body again and got into the yoga world, right? Because there was something about these practices of just connecting myself and my mind to my body that was so empowering. And you
Mhm.
know how you said like medical school seemed like kind of like out of the reach. Anatomy seemed like out of the reach for me. Like I was not a science brain at
Yeah,
all.
same.
And social science, sure, but you get me
Yeah.
into a chem lab or a biology lab, like you've lost me.
Mhm.
Um, and so a lot of my practice started out with the same kind of curiosity of like, what is this ancient wisdom? And, I feel very blessed that I did marry someone of a strong cultural background who still engages in those teachings, like his parents are very engaged in them, that I get to play with this kind of
Mhm.
concept because I would not get that from my family, right?
Mhm.
In our household growing up, there was none of that. It was just you go to the doctor, you take an antibiotic, or you go to the doctor, you take the birth control pill, you go to the doctor, you take whatever, right? But it was never about this trusting of your body as a healing process.
Mhm.
And so it's funny that when we were talking earlier, and when we were talking about what we were going to talk about, you talked a lot about blending ancestral wisdom with contemporary knowledge. And
Yeah.
on my website, I call it bringing ancient wisdom to meet the modern body, right? And so
Oh,
it's
yeah, yeah,
very similar in
yeah.
concept of like what drew me to this. And I found that in the beginning of my journey of getting more into that cultural or traditional approaches to healing, whether that be traditional Chinese medicine or whether that be Ayurveda, there's a lot with the Mayan as well. Like there's a lot of different approaches that we can take to the female body. I found that as much as I was excited about it, it was hard to get other people
Mm.
excited about it. I was like, how do I put words to what it is that I want them to get excited about? Which led me to more of like then the going, I have to get more clinical training. I have to
Yeah.
understand the science behind what's actually happening in the body. So that way I can still provide something that for many women they need as a kicking off point, but then we
Mhm.
can weave into these deeper layers of wisdom. So
I think it's even well, for me, when I really started to think about ancestral wisdom was, the thing that I always sort of anchor on is the moon. Like, I think about the
Mhm.
moon, right? And it's like when it dawned on me that the moon cycle is the same as the female cycle, like I made that connection and was just like, "Oh my gosh," like the way that that we all run in cycles. And then it sort of came out to me like the seasons, and I saw all these cool writings that people had around the female menstrual cycle connecting to seasons, connecting to the moon cycle, and I'm just like, from the dawn of time, people have probably known this, and then it got
Mhm.
really lost, and we've just become really, um, w in my mind, we have, like, let go a lot of that to fit into the rush of what is happening to get things done, and, during I think for me, it was really, like, I was starting to feel burnout in my work as, like, my full-time work, and, um when I started to realize like, "Oh, I'm, like, doing a presentation right now, like, while I'm bleeding, like, this is probably, like,
Yeah.
not the best time I need to be doing a presentation," or, like, I hate doing, like, these receipts or whatever, but then, like, during my luteal phase, I, like, love crushing the receipts. It was like, once I started to turn into all of that, I realized I didn't have to go into burnout, and thought, like, I wish everyone just sort of understood how they could play to their own unique cycle. And then, with that, it's also realizing like we don't have to be 100% on all the time. And I think there's a lot of guilt when you feel like you're not 100% every single day. And that's like the thing that I think really was a catalyst to me wanting to do this work a little bit more and to understand a lot of different things. And I'll just say one more aspect. I
Yeah.
when I was trying to conceive, I got Reiki done, and I had never had Reiki done. But one of my friends was like, "I think you need to go to this woman. She's really cool." And so I went, and she was like, "You're not being creative in your normal life, and you're like a creative soul. And the moment that you start creating is the moment that you'll create life." And she was like, "It's all interconnected." And I had done a yoga training like 10 years ago, like a 200-hour core power yoga training. And I remember like learning briefly about the chakras. But then when she said that, I kind of was like, okay, let's look at my root chakra, let's look at my solar plexus chakra, like let's look at these and like think about what do I need to do to expand. And so it's all energy too. So there's so many different types of, when we say like ancestral wisdom, it's like there's a lot of places to pull from to understand, we don't have to live in this day-to-day grind in a way that where it's only taking an antibiotic or only going to your doctor or giving up all agency.
Yeah. On your website, I thought this was really beautiful on your homepage that you write out or you have imagery right there at the top of it of just saying menarche, womanhood, and motherhood.
Mhm.
And something that you said at the beginning of the conversation, it really did, it it brought forth a thought that I just recently had. So my oldest daughter, I have two daughters and a son, and my oldest daughter is 11 right now, and they are getting into the juicy part of like puberty education at school.
Mhm.
Whether you want to call that sex ed, sex ed doesn't really encapsulate what they're teaching in my mind, but what's happening with their body. And honestly, up until this year, both of my daughters, if you would have asked them, they were excited about a period. They were excited about puberty. They were excited about their body changing. You know, sometimes we have a very open household about my body and what's happening with it. But sometimes when we go out in public and they share things that have happened, I'm like, I don't know if I'm ready for the whole world to know my weirdness. Like the one time I remember we met brand new friends, and my one daughter was like, yeah, my mom was crying so hard at the table because she just wanted to meditate because it was the full moon and the energy and her body. And I was like, we don't have to tell people that I was ovulating. Like it was just really interesting of like that may be too much information, but okay, we'll go with it. Let's tell people what I do. Um, but it's been really interesting because they have been enthusiastic. Even my son is very enthusiastic. My middle
Mm.
child, it was a few weeks ago, was teaching him all about what a uterus was because he's like, what's a
Oh, that's
uterus?
cool.
And so she was like, a uterus is this, and this is why we live longer. Like she went into all this detail. It's beautiful. But my daughter, being in grade 5 now, and then just starting this unit in April, came home and we were talking a bit about what was going on with the units and so forth. And she was like, I'm actually really scared about getting my period. And this
Mm.
has never been a thought. And a part of me was like, what has been transpired in these lessons? And like I've looked at the handouts and they are dry and they are clinical. And
Mhm.
then yeah, like I could see why everyone that was reading that or learning that as a lesson, there's no beauty that's being taught in this.
Right.
Like, they've gone so clinical in teaching girls about the changes that are going to potentially happen, well, not potentially, that are going to happen in their body, but they haven't brought any cultural teachings or any of this ancient wisdom or any of this beauty. And I was like, you're missing something so fundamental
Yeah.
for not just the girls, but for the boys to witness and to hold
Mhm.
space for them to be placeholders for this transition because it really is so amazing and miraculous. And so it's beautiful because I do this work. So I was able to debunk it with my daughter. But even
Mhm.
how you were saying at the beginning of the conversation, like you've seen these two births and you were like, holy, look at this body. Like, I gotta know more.
Mhm.
And then it was like, once everything started happening, it was like, well, society's now kind of shaping that I should be on birth control, that I should like getting confused by it. And
Yes.
then now, as you go into womanhood or motherhood, full circle back going in, holy crap, my body is amazing.
Yeah. No, seriously. I think, I when I got my period, I was, at home, and I had, like, one of those kits that they gave you at school, and, my grandfather was the only person home, and I was like, "I need you to call my grandma." And so he was like, "Why?" And I'm like, "Because I just need you to call her." And so he, like, passed me this, like, VTech, I don't even know if you remember those, like, those cordless phones that were kind of colorful. Like he passed that to me through the door, and I called my grandma, and she was like, "Oh, Hita, like congratulations, you're a woman." And I'm like, "Okay, that's great, but like what do I do, right? Like I need to know like what am I don't know what I'm doing to today." And so, so she coached me through like putting on the pad and that kind of stuff. And then when she came home, she like had this book for me, and it had a certificate about like becoming a woman. And I kind of felt like a little embarrassed by all the like, I don't know, just just her a little bit. I was like, "Oh, this is kind of embarrassing," right? Like, I don't need a certificate. And then but now I'm like, "Wow, I'm so happy that was my introduction to this because it really shaped me not being embarrassed by any of this, like not there's nothing embarrassing about your body." And I think sometimes in an effort to be like so diplomatic or just state the facts or go with the clinical stuff, we don't share the beauty or the magic. Like it is magic. I remember reading something a couple of years ago. It might have been like right after I finished The Red Tent, which was is such a great book, but
Such a great book.
such a great book. It was like talking about like how I'm trying to remember, maybe it was just a text or it was mostly like about how people were so surprised that women didn't die when they were bleeding. Like there was no like they were bleeding, but they weren't dying. And so then it was like like almost like you can bleed and not die. There's something magical about you going on, right? And that magic and like the veil is dropped. There's some cool text around like the veil gets dropped and you can talk to like the spirit world during this time. Like there's a lot of like hypotheses and things. And when you get into the folklore of the menstrual cycle, particularly around bleeding, it's really cool to learn all about that. And I think for so long, the way that we pitched like periods and just PMS and all this stuff, it's been at such a deficit to women, right? Like,
Hmm.
oh, well, you're we shouldn't let you in like a boardroom or to be, be in charge of a position because you're going to be like emotional or you might be angry or you're too tired, you have symptoms, blah 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 blah. And I think what I really want to do for this next generation is change that and flip that and make it like, wow, how powerful are you to have this moment in your month where you're tuned into your instincts like no other, or how powerful that you can basically tackle your taxes in a way that nobody could tackle like minute details because your brain is like wired to that, or how amazing that you're going to be so articulate during this one moment where you can ask for a raise, you can ask for you can ask for things that you might as well not ask for, or if you can really tune in, you can like be creative in this moment, and that's like really powerful. And so it's like switching the narrative for people to think about that. And I have been looking at all these books. My niece is turning 9, or she is 9. She's going to be 10, and she, I pulled all these like books around, like how can I get you ready for your cycle, and it is nothing really touches on magic. It all is just the like, here you go, here's your options. You can have tampons, pad, period cup, you're like a period underwear, and then like let's send you on your way. But it's not about like the magic. And so that's really what I want to bring to when I think about ancestral wisdom, is like that underlying current
Hmm.
of wisdom is magic.
Lucy Pierce, that's her name, Lucy Pierce. I was like,
Yes.
what's that author's name? She has a great book for women called
Moon time.
Moon Time, thank you.
Yes.
And then she has one for puberty called Reaching for the Moon. And I
Okay.
did buy that one. And so it's kind of like Moon Time, but it is wrote for teens.
Oh,
So
cool.
it does bring some of that magic in there, which is really, really great. And another really good book. It's not meant for the kids though, necessarily. It's more meant for our parenting, how to support and how to have those conversations, how to create the magic for your daughter. Is Miranda Gray wrote one on teenagers. It was something along, oh, I have it. It's really good. It's called, I want to say it's called like Raising Teenagers in Chaotic Times or something like
Mhm.
that. She wrote it during the pandemic. But yeah, and she talks a lot about in that book too of like looking at your cycle and then also having your daughter's map as well to know like if you are in your inner fall, like your luteal phase, and your daughter's in her inner spring, this is how you're feeling, this is how she's feeling. Now, how can you
Mm,
communicate with each other knowing that
yes.
you're in two different places, right? Which we often know that mostly in the home you're at the same time, but even if like you have two people in their inner fall and then you add perimenopause into that, there can be
Yes.
some tensions. But yeah, it's a really great book as well. I really enjoyed those two. So
I love
um
that.
and then yeah, like after my daughter came home and was saying all this, like how she was having these worries about it, I I have had a nice little pile of books for teens. There's a teen comic one out there. It's not the best one in my mind, but it does give them, like, it's a comic book, so at least gets them to read it. But I brought this stack down, like, put these in your closet and then just start reading when you want and then ask questions when you want. And so she's been flipping through those on her own just to give her a different perspective and to expand, I think, sometimes on the concepts because they only have so many hours to teach a unit. And it's
Mm,
like, here's your five laser points of what you need to know. And it's, I don't, dry's not the right word, but it's kind of, I want to say it just creates fear, right? Because it's just like, you're going to bleed for this many days, right? But it's not putting any context, like the deeper stuff of what's really happening, right? Like, what
mhm.
is your body really doing? And I think that's where the empowerment comes back for women.
Mhm. I totally agree. And I think it's even like when you learn, I think what's so cool too is we're just in this moment of life where like menstrual blood is finally getting studied. And there's just like things that are coming to light that are finally crossing over into the scientific world where people are like, okay, well, it's getting proven by something, right? But it's like, hey, maybe like not using a tampon every time because we're always on the go, like maybe free bleeding for a little bit. Like, I think there's some like interesting ways to like embrace womanhood that we could kind of pass on to our youth that doesn't have to be all about like how do I hide this, how do I make sure I'm still operating as normal so nobody knows what's going on. And it's like let's actually think about this a little bit more. And I have a boy, I have a toddler, and um I've just been thinking a lot about like how to have him view womanhood because I think
Hmm.
it's really cool to be raising a man who understands women and can be um, just like an advocate for them in different ways. And I don't know if you've read like Elisa Vitti at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So she wrote a book a couple of years or like I don't know how many years ago, but it was a second one after Woman Code. It was about living
Flow.
flow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she talks about like the male cycle being every 24 hours and the female cycle being every month. And how we need that. We need both of those things in the world, and one's not better than the other. And like I've just been thinking a lot about that with my son and how do I help him see that and see the virtue in both. Like we need the yin and the yang. And so that's when you get back to like ancestral wisdom when you think about what is that or the yin and the yang, right? Like you think about the light and the dark to everybody and the light and the dark to the world, and how we need this counterbalance. And so a lot of like things in life can just go back to teachings that have existed for millennia that we
Mhm.
can tap back into.
Yeah, and that we can really modernize them to what our current lifestyle is
Hmm.
like. And like part of my teachings of what I help coach women on, because a lot of my work is around stress and how to build that stress resiliency, is around cycle syncing and
Hmm.
around how can we start to look at how we can use our cycle as our superpower in our parenting, in our relationships, in our work life, but then also educate those in our life around how they can also support our menstrual cycle. And so, like, talking about the yin and the yang, this beautiful example came, and I think this was the first time it was a really big initiation for me of like the power of this work when we really start to come into some of these teachings and put it into practice or, put our flair on it to fit our life was during COVID. I remember my husband had to work out of the house and I worked in the house and I had to do homeschooling in the house and
Yeah.
I had three kids and it was a chaos. And I remember feeling so burnt out and we were at edges with each other because we were also in lockdown. Like even though he left every day to get to leave, he was still locked in an office. If you're in the hallways, you wear a face mask. Like it was all that stuff. And I remember one night me going, I am so overwhelmed. Like I'm at capacity and you need to do more. And he was like, I'm overwhelmed and I'm at capacity. And I remember there was this instinct in me that was like, how can you say that? Right? How dare you? You get to leave for 8 hours. But good enough that and by coincidence, we were having this conversation in ovulation. So at least like I was able to like take a breath and be like, okay, wait a minute. There's something that we can work on here.
Mhm,
And this is one thing that I think is so beautiful about ovulation is that we really have the capacity to be able to hear somebody else's concerns and
mhm.
still hold our own truth without giving away our power and being able to come to conflict resolution. So in this moment where I was like, this is a conflict, um, I was able to say, okay, I get it. This is the environment that we're living in right now, and we can't escape it. We have 3 kids.
Mhm.
But I also know I can't keep operating the way that I am. And so it's like, let's use my cycle then. Let's use my cycle as our guide. And so for my luteal phase or my menstruation, those 2 weeks, I need you here on time after work. Like, no, like I just got to send out one more email. Like it's 4:30, you're in your vehicle coming home. Like I don't care. If you have to do the work from home, you do it from home. But like there has to be boundaries where even in lockdown that I can then lock myself in the bedroom with no sound, no stimulation, like I need to be left alone. And then the first 2 weeks of my cycle, when I'm in my follicular phase and my ovulation, I can really support you because I have more energy. And so if you're feeling burnt out, go drive an extra half an hour in your truck or go to the store just to wander the store if you need to. But you take that extra time that you need to guilt free. Just send me a text to let me know so that at least we're communicating. But do you? But those last 2 weeks, I do me. And
Yeah,
it
I like
really
that.
worked to get us through that pandemic, right? Because it was challenging. And although, a lot was put on me, he was feeling impacts because his whole life had shifted too,
Yeah.
right? And so this is where we can take some of these teachings and just modernize it for what does it work for our lifestyle right now, and how can we get our partners or our sons, like my youngest is 5 and he's a boy, how can we get him involved, right?
Mhm,
And I think that we can raise a really compassionate next generation of both boys, but also women, because there's
mhm.
a deep sisterhood wound that goes with this work, I think, sometimes when we haven't been given the gift of understanding the magic behind our cycle.
I really agree with that. Part of my thought process too in starting Mi Hita was like, I wanna elevate the womanhood journey in a way that feels empowering to people, and the word empowering just, like, really gets thrown around a lot, and so it's, like, hard to think of a different, synonym for it, but it's I want for women to feel from the moment that they get their period, that they have the tools and resources and feel just, like, set ablaze to, like, know, like, this
Mhm.
is cool. This is I'm in my reproductive years, and this is what it means for me. And then when you are thinking about if you want to reproduce, right? Everyone should deserve a choice in that. And so thinking about motherhood or what that takes for you, what does it mean to be a mother and all the different capacity like focal points that come into it with our biology because so much changes and you don't even realize like how important picking a partner is, right? Like you literally the placenta inside of you is the cells of your partner and that physically and chemically changes your body for the rest of your life. Like there's so much there that I want people to understand. And then, when I think about ancestral wisdom too with women, it's like after you have a baby, the first 6 weeks, the fourth trimester, the first 40 days, how important that is to your health for the next 40 years. And so there's this like bounce back culture and all these things that we kind of try to get women back on the grind. It's not good for them. It's not good for your spirit, your baby spirit, your bond in your physical health for the next 40 years of your life. So how do we teach people that, right? And then you get into like the menopause, perimenopause phase, and although that's like not on my website right now, it is something that I'm like thinking through and how am I going to wrap that in because then you're just in this crone era where you are awesome, right? And it's like you
Yep.
have so much wisdom to give, and it's not like you're just put on a shelf or waiting for the like. Even if you're not in reproductive years, what does that mean? And there's just so many examples, like, I don't know if you saw that on social media with the whales, like, how whales that are no
Mhm.
longer like yeah, that are no longer reproducing, the whales come in, and the grandmother whales basically are the midwives, and then they take care of the calf right after it's born, and, it's like it's all paying it forward and working through. So when you say about this, like, sisterhood wounds, it's I think that is a piece of this, like healing some wounds for myself, but then also just wanting to equip our next generation to feel really emboldened and ablaze to like chart a path where they're not at 30 thinking, okay, I'm going to have a kid. Let me get off the pill. And then I have no idea what comes next. And I missed a whole piece of my reproductive years where I could have been really, really empowered.
Yeah, that's one thing I do hear quite often from women that I work with is like, how am I in my 40s? Because a lot of women that I do work with are in that midlife. So there's always that thing of like, I'm in my 40s. How am I only just now learning about my body this way in a way that feels real, that it feels like I'm a part of this process? And you had just made that comment about like, well, what's next? Like, what do we? And I think this is the beautiful time right now is that we have so many practitioners like yourself and myself and so many other women internationally that have raised the flag and are like, but wait a minute.
Mhm.
There's more here. And let's learn about it and let's teach. And so we're healing it for ourselves. And there's enough of a mass right now that they
Mhm.
are going to be the crones. And just think of how many crones that, we're the lighthouses right now that are going to turn into that crone energy that's really going to support drastic change in the world, is what I like to believe. Like, I think this next wave of cronehood is going to be it's going to be magical. It's really going to be potent because it is going to be supporting how women feel in their bodies.
Yes. And it's all component. I think about like why the wellness, quote, wellness industry is like kind of seems to be really going off, but it's like there's a collective healing that needs to be done. And there's so many different modalities that you can do that through. But, and you and I are both completing the women's hormone health coaching class certification. But I I think it comes down to like these basic principles of like teaching women about food, about sleep, about exercise, about like the basic components to life that fit within our cycle. And it's like so simple yet so challenging for like the noise, to block out the noise and to figure out how to live in that sort of space. And so I think it's so cool when you just said that about we're gonna have all these crowns. I just got the chills because I'm like, yeah, heck yeah. Oprah like just did that cool perimenopause, especially, I'm like, there's so many cool people that are like talking about stuff now. And so I think it's gonna be such a cool time for your daughters, for like our youth to grow up in a space where they're empowered and know their options, um,
Mhm.
and can approach something in a way that maybe they don't sign up to do something like we did because they just have a little bit more insight and knowledge. And but I think so. Then on that though, the scary part to me is like we have seen, so now when we look back, right, and I think back to my grandmother's generation to like now, a lot gets lost. So it's very easy for
Mhm.
everything to get lost in a generation. And so that's what we have to think about, like systematic work with this to continue to keep on. So maybe like we're really rallied around it. And then this next generation of girls is like, oh, it's always been the thing. Like I know about all of this. But if they don't like pass on the torch to that next generation, it gets lost again. And so it's like, how do we think about our work systematically for generations to come? And so we continue to build on top of it so it doesn't get, lost
Yeah,
essentially. Yeah.
that's a really, really valid point because we're enthusiastic about it because it's all new and shiny.
Hmm.
And it won't be as shiny for my daughters. It will just be everyday life
Hmm.
for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
How special that they get to live in that.
I know.
Yeah. But still. Yeah.
What about the teachings? No, that's a really, really great point. And I think that's where we just keep trying to nurture um the the midwives of we'll call them the midwives of the womb, right? Of the womb
Mhm.
work, of helping them really teaching it as that this is a thing. Like it's funny, I just had this thought the other day in my bathroom when I was thinking of like, what kind of social media post should I start planning out for the next month? This is where my thought goes when I'm brushing my teeth. And one of them was around this whole idea, and oh my God, my brain just stopped now.
That's
Welcome perimenopause and bleed days. What was my thought on social media?
Oh, you were saying something about the midwives, like the
Oh,
womb midwives.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, around the midwifery of it is just that, we have this time where we can really start to create a new generation where we are promoting education around this, right? Like
Hmm.
where women can start to see this as a career option. And
Hmm.
my whole thought when I was brushing my teeth was like, how did I end up here? I would never went to my school counselor saying, "Okay, career counselor, can you help me find a job?" Like I always thought I was going to be a lawyer,
Okay.
ironically enough. I thought I was going to be a lawyer because there was no box to check to say like teach women about hormones, right? It was like
Yeah.
doctor, firefighter, but no like be a midwife for women's hormones. And I think like this is the work now is that we keep teaching women that not only is this that this is your journey, but that
Hmm.
this is also like this is a career path and a
Hmm.
valid career path, right? Like this is just as important as being a physician or a dentist or a firefighter or
Hmm.
whatever else. Like we are space holders for women to learn about their bodies so that way they don't have to hopefully go through as much menstrual suffering, let's call it,
Hmm.
that we had to because of choices we didn't know were impacting our body. And so I think that this is the path is that, you know, being a midwife years ago, like your grandma's generation, that was something that was important. Our generation, it was a doctor. It wasn't a midwife. Like
Hmm.
I didn't even know a midwife existed until I was I was pregnant or trying to get pregnant, right? And so we're bringing back that education that these are careers. These are pathways that
Yeah.
are important.
Yeah. There's a lot. I think with that too, it's also trying to debunk, I think, the separation. So right now it's like there's like the Western way to do it, and then there's sort of these alternative ways to do it. And it's I think figuring out how we set up models of success to show that there's just synergy between they complement each other. There's no like this or that. And so when I think about my own journey into motherhood, I had a traditional home midwife and I had my OBGYN that was like in the hospital and I did co-care. And that was important to me because I knew what I was going to get from each served a different purpose. And it was a lot of money to do it both those ways. There wasn't an overlapping not everyone can do that, right? But I knew I wanted to do that. And so we set aside funds to do that. And I knew I wanted to be cared for after like in those first 6 weeks, my midwife came to my home every week and cared for me. And so I knew I wanted that in a different way. And so now my friend is giving birth in New York, and I have been keeping tabs on what's happening in the country, and I came across ULA, this place in New York that's basically what I created for myself. It's like you have a midwife and you have a OBGYN and they do things and they're connected to the hospital and they have their own center and they have doulas, and it's like all the things that I had to outsource and figure out for myself. They're trying it and this is a model that's happening, and I'm just like, do this. Like you need to like this is cool. Tell it like let's figure out that model and how can we replicate that in other places. And so I think it's even when I became a doula in San Diego, there wasn't a lot of doulas, and now there's like an explosion. There's a bunch of doulas going on. There was two birth photographers when I first started off, and so now there's a bunch of birth photographers. So I think it's cool because there's more and more people are gaining confidence in this space because others are paving the way. And so how do we create new models now that go against the like you have to live in these different types of spaces? Um,
Mhm.
and that to me is really exciting because we're breaking down some of the molds. And so people are going to have maybe your insurance eventually will pay for both of those things and you won't be out thousands and thousands of dollars, but we'll have the care that you need. But it's like it's only through testing out this type of stuff that we're going to get there. And so I think that's what's also really cool about where we're going.
Yeah, I love that. And I think a lot of times you'll hear this pushback of like, but it'll never get there, right? Like a lot of people are always like, but that will never happen. How can that possibly happen? I hear about this a lot of when I'm talking about the cycle and creating a work schedule that
Mm,
fits the feminine body. I always get, but like really, is that any workplace ever going to put that in place? And I read this beautiful article. I cannot remember where. I know I have the link saved somewhere, but in there, the author had mentioned, she was like, if this seems like out of reach, remember that maternity leave at one point was out of reach, right? Women were not allowed time off, not allowed to have a career to have a baby.
Hmm.
Like if you were choosing career, there was no taking time off. And now, not so much in the US, but in Canada, we're
Yeah.
given a full
I was
year
like,
off.
we're still a ways away.
Still a little ways away. But in Canada, we get
Yeah.
a full year off.
Yeah.
European countries get a year
Amazing.
to 2 years, depending on where you're at, right? And so, you know, at one point, I'm sure someone who was like, you know what, we're going to implement a policy where if women have a baby, they get a full year off work. I'm sure there were some men in that boardroom that were like, that's crap, because what about me? I don't get a year off because I'm a man. But now it's so like no one questions it, right? At least not in
Mhm.
Canada. In Canada, it's like, okay, so you're on a mat leave. Okay, cool. And it's also pretty much expected in most workplaces that if you take a mat leave, you're going to come back for 7 months so that you can get another mat leave for your next baby. A lot of women come back to work
Oh,
for
wow.
just 7 months so they can get just that enough hours so that way they can take a second mat leave. It's just people are like, okay, this is what's going to happen. Now that she's in the baby making years of her life, we're most
Mhm.
likely going to see this for 3 years. Like we're going to have to find somebody to fill this role potentially for 3 years or set up systems to support that 3 year. So I don't think it's impossible. I don't think we're there, but I
Yeah.
think that it is very doable for us to be able to change what society sets as acceptable and non-acceptable, or what's possible and not
Mhm.
possible. Anything is possible, right? Everything's changing around us all the time. AI is changing the way we do work,
Yeah.
right? Like if AI can change the way we do work, I'm sure we can figure out how to fit women's health and women's bodies into a system. And I think collaborative care is going to be, especially because we have these lighthouses, like I mentioned right now, shining the light on this is a thing. We're piquing curiosity in some people that maybe have been trained in institutions that this wasn't something that was a priority important. Now they're being like, but wait a minute, maybe there is value to this, or maybe there is a piece to this.
Right.
And, you and I are so lucky that we have an amazing, amazing mentor that right now is one of those big lighthouses. And anyone that doesn't know, Nicole Jardim. And she is in contact with a lot of great contacts of naturopathic doctors or people in this
Mhm.
industry that are changing that dialogue and are talking to other physicians. Like these aren't just relationships with the holistic alternative therapy kind of community. This is starting to poke light into some really outdated ways of doing things. And
Yeah. Well, I think too, like the piece to me that has been interesting to watch unfold has been how we continue to like politicize things because, there's like, for example, right, you get that in Canada, you all get this amazing leave, and it's like there's so many amazing books out now just about the neurological pathways that develop for kids once they're from ages 0 to 3, and how important those years are with the mother. And there's like this actual body of research around just regulation, forming like secure attachment bonds, all that stuff. And so you would take that and you think, okay, how do I want to create space for me as a mother to like want to mother, right? And then it becomes like this thing where you're either a traditional stay-at-home wife or then you are a career mother. And so then you have people who are really trying to break the mold, and there's some cool authors out there like Nina Rush, who just wrote The Power Pause, and that came out this year, who are trying to like say like it doesn't have to be this either or. We don't have to have this culture of either or. But I do think there's people want to like constantly put it in like a in this or that type of box. And so
Mhm.
I do think it's just so important to figure out how do we create the inroads. And you're right, we do have so many people that are connecting and chatting. And so I think for both you and I, we're like, if you are a practitioner or somebody who's in a different lane or thinking, but you're listening to this and you want to connect and want to work with us, like we want to have that intersection point, because that collaboration is only going to help push us forward. And My acupuncturist here in San Diego is a phenomenal healer. She just is she does so many great things that are beyond even just acupuncture. But we were talking about IVF the other day, and IVF, even the basically the person that the grandfather of IVF was like, you should go hand in hand with acupuncture. And that's why you see so many IVF clinics now connecting to acupuncture. And people used to be so afraid of acupuncture, and now it's becoming such a mainstream thing. And even like cupping, I learned how to fire cup. My husband and I did a fire cupping workshop, but Michael Phelps is the one that made that kind of popular, like with his cup marks during the Olympics. And it's like, oh, well, what is that modality? And so I think as long as we get people
Yeah.
overlapping and we don't politicize it, we can get to a space that is just empowering for everybody. And it doesn't need to be like, I'm part of this movement or this movement. It's like
Yeah.
everything needs to just come together in a way that we see one another's sort of value adds.
And I would add on to that that it's a small, simple step. It's bringing it into your home, right?
Mm, yeah.
It, this doesn't have to be a scary thing about like, okay, I'm going to put on my work calendar for everyone in my company to see that I'm on my period. The work starts in the home, and you'd be so surprised at the massive ripple that that puts out into the world. So for 10 plus years now, I have been very open about my cycle in our home. Like we plan everything from vacations to birthday parties to everything about where I'm going to be in my cycle and what my capacity is at. And this my husband now owns his own business. And it was last year he came home and he's like, you know what? I really need to hire someone to help me and we need a receptionist. But he's like, I think what we need to do is rethink how, rather than having it at this 8 to 5 p.m. position, why can't we make it work so that way, as men in the office or people that are in the office for he's an engineer doing this stuff, we can answer phones for an hour and a half or whatever while doing our work, and we get a mom who wants to get back in the workforce, right? Like this is an entry level job, but why can't we make it around pickups and drop offs? Like why
Mm-hmm.
can't we adjust for that? Why can't we have flexibility? And so this wasn't my idea in his head, this was his own idea of like there's a whole untapped market of people that would love to make a little bit of extra coin, but aren't going out there and applying because they have to worry about kids' sick days and they have to worry about PD days and they have to worry about drop offs and pickups. And he's like, what happens if we accommodate that? Like, what would that look like? And that would be easy, right? And I was like, yes, this is it. But would he have gotten there if we haven't had these conversations for
Right.
10 years about my needs?
Right.
Probably not. And
Right.
so, like, this is how we can rewire some of the thought processes that are ingrained in our systems by just starting in the home,
I love that.
changing our husbands and our sons.
I love that so much because, and I think also too with your daughters, like just everybody, right? Everyone in the home. But nothing is more disappointing to me in my professional life, in the corporate world, has been seeing women leaders lead non-cyclically. Like me, like the examples that they're showing for the future generation. Like I see it so much in like just their own health and how they show up and like how like their own relationships or like what they're sacrificing. Like it became so apparent to me, just in my early 30s. I saw people, women who were leading and thought, oh my gosh, I don't ever want their job. I don't ever want their
Mhm.
job if I have to operate in that kind of way because it's so out of tune with like what I want to be. And so I just I want to see, it's like, how do we get those women who have so much control and they have so much power and voice for where they're at, but to get them to see this too, because
Mhm.
they're not shaping the way for our young girls. And so it's like both men and then you have women in power who are not privy to this. And so that's a whole other topic for another day. But I do love that, one of the things that Elisa Vitti does say in that flow workbook was like, if you can't change your calendar because your work doesn't allow that flexibility, you can always change your perspective of how you show up.
Yeah.
So if you are bleeding and you don't really feel like socializing, but you have an all team whatever, like, and you have to go hang out, it's like, then maybe you can be the one that's a little more quiet and a little bit more
Mhm.
introspective, and you decide to be the note taker for the group instead of being the one that's the sharer, or and so it's like, how do you reframe your own, like, what is within your locus of control? It's like both things, right? Like, how do we teach people their own locus of control, but then how do we get the people who are influencers of power to help shape things? And I don't know if women that are in power, there's two thoughts I have for that. It's like, I don't think that they were ever taught, so they don't know. So there's like missing piece of it. But then also, it's really scary to try to change a system when you've barely clung to it yourself or gotten into that place too. So I don't know. It'd be really cool to pull together a group of like the top women leaders and like help them debunk a lot of the things that don't need to be true. Like why are
Yeah.
we forcing a bunch of return to office stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, when just because like that maybe doesn't need to happen. So, there's just like a lot of things that I think can be true.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this has been so great. We are at time, and
Yes.
I have loved this conversation. I'm sure you and I could go on forever on this. It's been such a fun conversation. I do like to end these conversations with a womb-led tip. I call it a womb-led tip, but it's really just like if you had one piece of wisdom that you wanted to just like drop the seed for women to ponder, and I'm sure you have many, but if you have one that it's like, you know what, I really just want women to like walk away from this conversation and just remember this one thing, what would that one wisdom tip be for them?
Ah, such a good thing. I think my one tip of wisdom is life is cyclical, and it's cyclical in there's nothing linear in life. It is all valleys and peaks and turns around, and it's more valleys and peaks. And so once you can tap into your own cycle and understand like the ebbs and flows of that, it'll change perspective for life. Like, it'll change your ability. And so listen to like what the grandmas are saying and what the aunts are saying and what people are like giving you information on, because they've lived through cycles and they have their own cycle, but they can just give you a lot of knowledge in that. So I think that's just maybe my
I
one
love that.
tip. Yeah.
I love that. It came to mind of like that whole saying of rinse and repeat, but with women's bodies, it's not rinse and repeat. It's like the spiral of like it'll come to an end, but there will be a new beginning that you'll get a chance to repeat a
Yeah.
lesson that you choose of, and then you get to come to an end and a beginning again. And yes, everything in life is this spiral cyclical of beginnings and endings with more beginnings and more
Mhm.
endings.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that. I'm so happy that you had me on today, and this has like been such a fun experience for me. I can't wait to listen to the other guests that you have, and
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just excited to see what you do too after we finish all of our courses, modules, and all that stuff, and we're
So
taking the
close,
last
so
exam.
close.
So close.
Well, thank you so much for being on here today. It's been so fun talking with you and getting to know you a little bit better. Friends, have you had a chance to download my new free ebook? Maybe it's not you. The Truth on PMS and How You Can Take Back Control of Your Cycle is now available. This is truly a book that I think needs to be in the hands of every woman who struggles with the second half of their menstrual cycle. So if this is you, click on the link in the show notes and download your free copy today. And remember to subscribe to this podcast and share a review if you loved this episode. Until next time, remember, womb wisdom equals connection to self, which ultimately equals inspired living.